been working with a group of other attorneys, all of us, on a voluntary basis without pay to research and draft the ethics initiative which we're presenting here tonight at this hearing. I'm going to explain briefly in 15 minutes. I tell you that because I don't want you to fall asleep while I'm going through all of the law business. What it is that our initiative attempts to accomplish. And it is broken out into 3 basic parts. And you have in front of you, I believe you're holding in your hands, our executive summary, which explains in the salient points of the reform that we're trying to get passed by the initiative process. 1, we establish an independent ethics commission to administer an ethics code and to implement that reform as per the legislative process. 2, we have a comprehensive, balanced, fair code of conduct which is going to govern ethics at the legislative level. 3, we have established a process which our independent ethics commission has to follow. We believe it a very fair and even-handed process as it fields ethics complaints, if any there be, against legislators and also in performing the other functions the commission has. So those are the 3 main components of our proposed legislation. And going back to that independent commission, is an independent commission independent of what? It's not independent of the legislature, because in our state constitution we have a constitutional provision which requires that the legislature govern its own process in terms of the discipline of members. So we can't stray very far from that constitutional constraint, and we have to have the legislators or the legislative power at the center of any kind of reform in this area. Having said that, our state constitution grants legislative power to 2 separate bodies. One, of course, is the legislature, consisting of the House and the Senate. The second is the people of the state of Utah. So the people, although we can't amend our Constitution by the initiative process, we can exercise basic legislative power. And we are proposing to exercise that power as people, as citizens, to do what needs to be done to set up a process to regulate and administer an ethics process at the state legislative level. So we can't be independent of the legislature. What are we independent of as a commission in this instance? We hope to be independent of the political process. You heard Dixie explain that so often things get stalemated on Capitol Hill because there's partisanship. I witnessed this personally during the last little while with the ethics complaints last year. It's very, very difficult for legislators to snitch on other legislators. They've got a million political reasons why they don't want to. Most of the time they're frightened and afraid of retaliation, punitive actions by leadership, marginalizing them in terms of what they want to accomplish as individual legislators. And then when it comes down to the judging, people shouldn't be judges in their own cause. We all know that instinctively. But you can't, it's hard to be independent sitting in judgment on your peers for doing something that you may feel they might turn around and accuse you of doing. So there's a real political problem that our legislators have in bringing the complaints against legislators in the nature of ethics complaints and in sitting in judgment on their peers. And this independent commission hopefully will be free from that political partisanship so that it can give fair, even-handed rulings on ethics complaints. We've made them independent of the political process in 3 ways. One, we've set up a list of criteria where they have to be free from politics. They can't be lobbyists for 5 years before they sit on the commission. They can't be legislators or office holders for 5 years before they sit on the commission, and so forth. They can't be members in leadership positions in political parties. So it's going to be, by standards, independent-minded people. And then we are selecting these commission members under our initiative with a random process. The leadership, that is the Speaker, the President of the Senate, the minority leaders of both houses, have to agree unanimously on a pool of candidates who meet these criteria I've just outlined. Those candidates' names are then put into a hat, and members of the legislature, by random selection, randomly draw the names from the hat. And the first 5 drawn are members of the commission. Our commission is empowered not only to administer the ethics code, but to study ethical reform at the Capitol, and specifically to look at the money problem, which we feel is at the heart of a lot of ethical abuses, and to report and recommend to the legislature and the public for further reform in those areas. That's our independent commission. The ethics code itself establishes some major reforms. It corrects many of the instances you saw Dixie explain to you. Legislators may no longer be lobbyists at the same time while serving. There's a revolving door provision. They can't just walk out of the legislature and then become a lobbyist for a 2-year period. There are heightened disclosure requirements for conflicts of interest and so forth. We have tried to address those specific instances which seem to be most troublesome, with abuse of power, conflict of interest, influence of money and the like, and written what we hope to be clear guidelines for legislators to follow. You and I, in our everyday jobs, live by rules. As a lawyer, I've got a code of conduct. Accountants live by a code. So do accountants and others. We don't think it's too much to ask that our legislators do what we do. You've probably heard it reported that we have in our state a pretty businesslike management of state affairs, and our legislature likes to take credit for that state of affairs. We don't think that's a bad standard. We look to the law of corporations and partnerships where management in those entities are bound by what we call fiduciary responsibilities. A fiduciary is like a trustee. He owes primary loyalty in all his dealings with the people for whom he's working. He has a duty to make open disclosure of everything. He has to be transparent with those to whom he renders service. If our state legislators would be held to that standard, we think we would be an even more effectively managed state. A lot of the self-dealing and the like could possibly be eliminated. So that's our code of conduct. And then finally, we have a procedure that is set forth to administer the code. Let me explain a couple of the portions where we've really tried to be constructive and fair to our legislators. As many of you know, they're good people. Dixie, I think, emphasized that many of them feel a little hamstrung. They would like to see some of these reforms passed, but year after year they get put into the hopper. They don't get out of the committee, or they don't pass this particular house and the like. They can't do it on their own. They need us to help them, and we have tried to be constructive and helpful in our approach to them. Here are a few of the things, just hitting some of the high points, where we've attempted to strike a good balance between a strict code of conduct and fair administration of that code. Our commission will be